My son, Marcus, has no idea I make $40,000 a month. To him, I'm just Ilara. The woman who left for the office early and came home tired. The one who cooked simple meals, wore the same wool coat for a decade, and whose idea of a splurge was a new library book. He thinks I'm a secretary, or maybe an administrative assistant. He assumes I live paycheck to paycheck in my modest apartment. I've never corrected him. Why would I? I grew up believing dignity was worn quietly, like a locket under a blouse, not a billboard on your chest. For nearly 20 years, I was a senior executive at a multinational corporation. I negotiated million-dollar contracts, led teams across continents, and made decisions that shaped markets. That life required a certain uniform and a certain silence. So I came home, shed the power suit, and became just mom. The money piled up in silent, well-managed accounts. True power, I've learned, isn't in the display. It's in the observation. And I was observing very closely the day Marcus called me. His voice had that pinched, anxious quality it gets when he's trying to please someone. Mom, I need a favor. Simone's parents are visiting from overseas. They want to meet you. We're having dinner Saturday. At Aurelio's. Aurelio's. A restaurant where the lighting costs more than most people's rent. The request felt less like an invitation and more like a summons to an inspection. Do they know anything about me? I asked, my voice neutral. A beat of silence. Then, the stammer. I told them you work in an office. That you live simply. That you don't have much. Simply. The word hung in the air, a tiny polished dagger. It wasn't a description. It was an apology. An apology for me. I took a slow breath, looking around my living room, the comfortable, faded armchair, the bookshelves lined with well-loved paperbacks, the absence of any glaring brand names. It was a curated life of quiet contentment, and he saw only lack. Okay, Marcus, I said, my decision crystallizing in the space between heartbeats. I'll be there. If my son saw me as a problem to be managed, if these people were coming to assess the poor relation, then I would give them a performance they'd never forget. I would become the woman they expected. Broke, naive, and utterly pitiable. I wanted to see their true faces, unguarded by politeness. My corporate instincts, long dormant in motherhood, hummed back to life. This was due diligence. Saturday evening, I dressed for the part. I chose a shapeless, slate-gray dress from the back of my closet, one I'd kept for gardening. I paired it with scuffed, low-heeled shoes and carried a faded canvas tote. I pulled my hair into a limp ponytail and studied myself in the mirror. I looked exhausted, frayed, forgettable, perfect. The taxi deposited me in front of Aurelio's, a temple of gleaming glass and warm, exclusive light. I could feel the weight of the place before I even touched the door. They were already there, a tableau of calculated elegance by the window. Marcus stood stiffly in a new, too formal suit. Beside him, my daughter-in-law Simone was a vision in cream silk, but her smile was tight, her eyes darting nervously to the entrance. And then I saw them, the main event. Veronica, Simone's mother, was a symphony of emerald green and cold sparkle, sequins, jewels, hair swept into a flawless chignon. Her husband, Franklin, was a monument in a grey suit, a watch on his wrist that probably cost more than my first car. They weren't sitting, they were holding court. I shuffled in, my posture meek, my steps small. Marcus's eyes widened as he took me in. A flush crept up his neck. Mom, you came. Of course, son. Simone offered a chilled cheek for a kiss. Mother-in-law. Her voice was a whisper. Then, the introductions. Dad, Mom, this is Marcus's mother, Simone said, the phrasing making me sound like a condition, not a person. Veronica's eyes performed a swift, brutal appraisal. They traveled from my worn shoes up to my unkempt hair, registering every deliberate flaw. Her smile was a thin, condescending curve as she offered a lifeless hand. A pleasure. Franklin's handshake was a brief, dismissive pressure. I was ushered to the seat at the far end of the table, An afterthought. The heavy, French menu arrived. I opened mine and let confusion play on my face. "Do you need help with the menu?" Veronica asked, her tone sweetly venomous. "Yes, please. I'm afraid I don't understand." She ordered for me without consulting my tastes. "Something simple," she told the waiter, her eyes flicking to me. "We don't want to overdo it." The first course was served. Veronica took a precise bite of her $80 steak. "Quality is worth paying for," she announced to the table, her gaze lingering on me. "One can't just eat anything, right?" "Of course," I murmured, playing with my simple salad. The conversation was a masterclass in subtle cruelty. Veronica led it, a tour guide through their wealth. The $1,000-a-night hotel, the luxury car rental, the shopping sprees. Each anecdote was a pebble dropped, testing the depth of my awe. I offered only quiet nods and timid smiles. "And you, Elara?" she finally asked, leaning in as if sharing a secret. "What exactly do you do?" "I work in an office," I said, dropping my gaze. "A little of everything. Filing, paperwork, simple things." "Ah," she said, exchanging a glance with Franklin that spoke volumes. "Administrative work. That's fine. All jobs are dignified." The main entrees were cleared, and the real performance began. Veronica's demeanor shifted, becoming falsely maternal, gravely concerned. "Elara, we need to speak as a family," she began, placing her hands on the table. "We love Marcus. But we want the best for our Simone. Stability is so important." Marcus shifted. "Mom, maybe not now. Let me finish, dear." She turned her laser focus back to me. "We understand you did your best. Raising a child alone. It must have been a struggle. But now, Marcus has new responsibilities. We don't want him burdened." The word landed in the center of the table like a dead bird. "Burdens." I echoed softly. "I don't mean to sound harsh," she continued, not sounding sorry at all. "But at your age, on a limited income, it's natural for a son to worry. We don't want that worry to strain his marriage." She paused, letting the threat hang. "So, Franklin and I have a proposal. We could provide you with a small monthly allowance. Say, $500 or $700. To help you live more comfortably, so Marcus doesn't have to." She leaned forward, her eyes hard. "And in return, we'd only ask you to respect their space. Give them the freedom to build their life. Without interference." It was a bribe. A cash for silence deal. They were offering to pay me to disappear from my own son's life. Marcus looked sick. "Mom, you don't have to listen to this." But Veronica held up a manicured hand, her eyes locked on mine, waiting for the grateful acceptance of the poor woman she saw. I slowly placed my napkin on the table. I took a sip of water. The timid mask didn't fall away. It dissolved, revealing the steel beneath. "That is a very interesting offer, Veronica," I said, my voice no longer meek. It was calm, clear, and carried across the table with an authority that made Franklin sit up straight. "But I have a few questions." The temperature in our little corner of Aurelio's dropped several degrees. The game, they suddenly realized, had changed. And they were no longer the players. They were the pieces. And I was just getting started. Franklin returned to the table, his face a thundercloud. "The bank says there's a hold on our accounts due to unusual international activity. They need 24 hours to clear it." He spat the words out as if they were poison. He looked at the empty space where the check had been, then at the serene faces around him. His eyes landed on me. "You? Me?" I asked, my voice mild. "I simply paid for dinner when your cards encountered difficulties. It seemed the polite thing to do." "Polite," he scoffed, the word thick with venom. But the bluster was gone, replaced by a simmering, humiliated fury. He'd been financially neutered in front of the very people he'd spent the evening trying to impress. Veronica was a statue of crumbling ice. The sequins on her dress seemed to mock her now, flashing under the restaurant lights like a cheap carnival prize. She couldn't look at me. Her gaze was fixed on the pristine white tablecloth, as if searching for a crack to disappear into. "This doesn't end here," she repeated, but the threat was hollow, a whisper against the gale of her own exposure. "You're right, it doesn't," I said, gathering my worn tote. "It ends with you knowing exactly who I am. And it begins with you deciding what to do with that knowledge. You can learn from it, or you can resent it. That choice is yours. But my relationship with my son, and how I choose to live my life, is mine." I turned to Marcus and Simone. My son's face was a map of confusion, awe, and a dawning painful understanding. Simone's was pure shame. "Mom," Marcus started, his voice rough. "All these years, I thought I had to take care of you. I felt guilty for every nice thing Simone and I had, thinking you had so little. I never wanted you to carry that weight," I said, placing a hand on his cheek. "I wanted you to build your own strength, not shoulder mine. My little was always my choice. My wealth was never meant to be your burden or your ladder." I looked at Simone. "You married my son for who he is, I hope. Not for the family he might one day inherit. That man," I said, gesturing to Marcus, "is worth more than any trust fund. Remember that." Simone nodded, fresh tears spilling over. "I will. I'm so sorry, Elara. For everything. For tonight, for not being stronger." "You can start being stronger now," I said simply. I gave Marcus's hand a final squeeze, then I turned and walked away from the table. I didn't look back. The click of my sensible shoes on the polished marble was the only sound in my universe. I felt the weight of 4 stunned gazes on my back until I passed through the glass doors and out into the cool night air. The valet, who had eyed my arrival with polite indifference, now sprang to attention. I handed him the ticket for my car. Not the taxi I'd arrived in, but the sleek, understated sedan I'd parked around the corner earlier. As I slid into the driver's seat, the familiar scent of leather and quiet luxury enveloped me. The engine purred to life, a whisper of contained power. I allowed myself one moment, just one, to let the mask fall completely. In the rearview mirror, my eyes were no longer those of a timid mother. They were sharp, clear, and utterly weary. The drive home was a blur of city lights. My apartment, when I entered, felt different. It wasn't just a modest haven anymore. It was a deliberate choice, a fortress of my own making. The silence was a comfort, not an emptiness. The phone rang an hour later. It was Marcus. "Mom." "Marcus." A long pause. Are you really a regional director?" "Yes." "And you make?" "Yes." Another silence, this one filled with the static of 1,000 unasked questions. "Why didn't you ever tell me? Did you think I'd become some kind of spoiled brat?" "I knew the person you were becoming was good and kind," I said, settling into my armchair. "I saw you work for your first car. I saw you study for scholarships. I saw the pride in your eyes when you got your first real job offer. That pride was yours, Marcus. Earned. I wouldn't trade that for anything. If you'd known about the money, that pride might have gotten tangled up with expectation, with entitlement. I wanted you clean of that." He was quiet for so long I thought he'd hung up. "They're at the hotel," he finally said, his voice flat. "Simone went with them. She said she needed to talk to them. Veronica was crying. Franklin was shouting about lawyers, about fraud, about how you set them up." "I didn't touch their bank accounts, Marcus," I said, a faint smile touching my lips. "Karma, however, has a delightful sense of timing." "What happens now?" The lost little boy was back in his voice. "Now," I said gently, "you and Simone decide what happens. You've seen the foundation her family is built on. It's your marriage. You choose what to build yours on." The next few days were a quiet earthquake. Simone called me, her voice small but steadier. She told me she'd confronted her parents. She told them their behavior was unacceptable, that their values were toxic. There had been a monumental fight. Franklin had raged about disrespect. Veronica had sobbed about ingratitude. For the first time, Simone said, she hadn't backed down. Marcus, meanwhile, moved through our shared world in a state of shell-shocked re-evaluation. Every memory was being relit. The modest birthday gifts that were always exactly what he wanted. The lucky bargain vacations that were perfectly planned. My constant refusal to let him pay for anything. It wasn't martyrdom, it was abundance, quietly shared. A week after the dinner, a courier arrived at my door with a small, heavy package. Inside, on a bed of velvet, was my black corporate card. Beneath it was a sheet of expensive stationery. The handwriting was Veronica's, sharp and angular. Ilara, we are returning this. We do not require your charity. Our accounts have been restored. We are returning home earlier than planned. What you did was cruel. You engineered a confrontation to make us look like monsters. Perhaps we acted poorly, but you are not without blame. You live a lie. You have deceived your own son for decades. What kind of mother does that? We will maintain a relationship with Simone and Marcus, as is our right. We suggest you do not interfere. I read it twice, then set it aside. There was no apology, no introspection, only a rearranging of the blame. It was exactly the response I'd expected. I didn't write back. The card went into my office safe, next to the transparent Centurion card. They were not symbols of wealth to me, but tools. And sometimes, tools are best kept sheathed. The true fallout was more subtle. Marcus and Simone began couples counseling. He told me they were learning to communicate as a team, without the shadow of her parents' expectations, or his misplaced guilt about me, clouding their judgments. One evening, Marcus came over alone. He sat in the chair opposite me, looking more like the thoughtful man I'd raised and less like the anxious boy of recent years. I've been thinking, he said, about what you said, about building my own strength. I think I need to apologize to Simone. Not for your money, but for the way I've let my worry about you, my false worry, sometimes put her in the middle. I made her choose between soothing me and dealing with her parents. That wasn't fair. My heart swelled with a pride no corporate bonus could ever touch. That sounds like a very strong place to start, I said. He looked around my living room, really looked, as if seeing it for the first time. You know this place. It's not modest because you had to. It's modest because you want to. It's peaceful here. It is, I agreed. Would you? He hesitated. Would you tell me about it sometime? Your job. What you really do. I smiled. I would love to. But be warned, I added, a playful glint in my eye. It involves a lot of spreadsheets. He laughed, a real, unburdened laugh I hadn't heard in years. It was the sound of a bridge being rebuilt, not on a foundation of secrets, but on one of newfound truth. As for Veronica and Franklin, they became a distant, manageable pressure on the horizon of my son's life, like a receding storm. They had been measured, and they had been found wanting, not by their bank statements, but by their own actions in the face of perceived poverty. And I remained Ilara, the woman with the simple apartment, the worn leather bag, and the quiet, unshakable power that comes not from what you have, but from who you are, and what you've chosen to build, in silence and in strength. It was intense, he said, the words heavy with exhaustion. Simone cried a lot. She told them they'd humiliated her, not just you. That their behavior made her question everything about her own values. Veronica, she tried to defend herself at first. Said you'd tricked them, that you'd provoked it. But when Simone asked her point blank if she'd have been so dismissive of a wealthy woman, she couldn't answer. I listened, the warm mug a small anchor in my hand. The morning sun painted streaks of gold across my worn kitchen table. And Franklin? I asked. He was quiet. Angry, but quiet. He finally said they were trying to protect Simone's future, and got carried away. It was the closest to an apology they could muster. It's a start, I said, though I didn't believe it was. It was an excuse, not a reckoning. Simone is staying with me, Marcus continued, his voice gaining a sliver of strength. She told them she needs space. She said she won't be seeing them for a while, not until they've had some serious conversations with a therapist, both separately and maybe together with us. Pride, sharp and sweet, cut through my morning calm. That's a very brave thing for her to do. It was. You should have seen her, Mom. She was shaking, but she stood her ground. She told them she loved them, but she loved herself and me more, and she couldn't be part of a family that operated like that. I closed my eyes, seeing it. The elegant daughter, breaking the mold her parents had poured her into. It was more satisfying than any corporate victory. What about you, Marcus? How are you in all this? A long sigh traveled down the line. I'm okay. Relieved, in a way. The mask is off. No more pretending their comments don't bother me. No more biting my tongue when Veronica makes a helpful suggestion about my career. It's out in the open now. It's messy and painful, but it's honest. He paused. Like that taxi driver said. I smiled. You overheard that? Enough. He seemed like a wise guy. He was. I took another sip. And your marriage? We're going to be okay, he said, and for the first time, I heard a bedrock of certainty beneath the fatigue. Better, maybe. We're talking about things we used to tiptoe around. Real things. Not just which sofa to buy. We spoke a while longer, the conversation shifting to mundane, healing topics. His work, the leaky faucet he needed to fix, a new recipe he wanted to try. It was ordinary. It was perfect. After we hung up, the silence of my apartment felt different. It wasn't the silence of solitude, but of resolution. The storm had passed, and the landscape, though altered, was still standing. The weeks that followed were a study in quiet transformation. Simone started individual therapy. She and Marcus began sessions together. They didn't share the details with me, and I didn't ask. It was their journey. But I saw the changes in Simone's eyes when she visited, less brittle, more thoughtful. She started asking me questions, real ones, about my work, my early struggles, not with the clinical assessment of before, but with genuine curiosity. Veronica and Franklin returned overseas as planned. The communication was sparse, strained. There were no more lavish gifts, no more unsolicited financial advice. A distance had been enforced, and it was doing them all good. One afternoon, Marcus came over with a bottle of wine, a good, but not ostentatious, bottle. Simone picked it, he said, setting it on the table. She's learning. Says she wants to appreciate the wine, not the price tag. We sat on my small balcony as the afternoon light faded. He was quieter than usual, turning his glass in his hands. Out with it, I said gently. He looked at me, a boyish vulnerability in his face. I've been offered a promotion. Big one. It would mean relocating. To Singapore. My heart gave a familiar maternal lurch, but I kept my face calm. That's incredible, Marcus. Congratulations. It's what I've been working toward, he said, but his excitement was tempered. But it's far. And with everything that's happened with Simone's family, I don't want her to feel like I'm pulling her away from everything as a solution. Or that I'm running. I considered this. Have you talked to her about it? Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first. Why? Because, he said, meeting my gaze, I need to know it's the right move for us, not just for my career. And you've always seen the bigger picture. You built a life on your own terms. I want that too. Not the money, but the integrity of it. I reached across and squeezed his hand. Then ask yourself this. Is the job in Singapore a step toward the life you and Simone want to build together? Or is it just a shiny rung on a ladder you feel you should climb? One is a choice. The other is an expectation. You've just broken free of a lot of expectations. Don't trade one set for another. He sat back, absorbing my words. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. But the question is. He nodded slowly. I'll talk to her tonight. He did. A week later, they came over together, hands linked. Simone's face was alight with a nervous energy. We're going, she announced. To Singapore. For the adventure. For our future, not just Marcus's career. We've set boundaries with my parents about communication. We're going to build our own life. Over there, we're just us. I saw it then, the partnership that had been buried under family pressure and unspoken guilt. It was fragile, but it was real. I hugged them both, my heart full. You'll visit, I said, not as a question. Every chance we get, Marcus promised. And you'll come see us. First class, on me. Or rather on your mysterious corporate expense account. We laughed, the sound echoing in my modest apartment, now filled with the priceless weight of our honest, hard-won future. After they left, I stood again on my balcony, looking at the city. Robert's stars were beginning to pierce the twilight. I thought of the mother I had been, the silent architect, the careful guardian. I thought of the woman I was now, revealed, perhaps a little more alone, but utterly authentic. The game was over. The performance was retired. What remained was the quiet, powerful truth of a life lived deliberately. Not in the shadow of wealth or the glare of poverty, but in the steady, clear light of my own making. And that, I knew as the first star blinked brightly overhead, was the only victory that ever really mattered. The weight of his confession settled between us for a moment. I could picture the scene, the stunned silence of the restaurant, the shattered crystal of their pride, my son finding his voice at last. Well said, I murmured into the phone, pride warming my chest. Thanks, Marcus replied, a flicker of his old humor returning. I learned it from you. We spoke a while longer, the conversation shifting to practicalities, boundaries, logistics, the fragile new architecture of their lives. By the time we hung up, the sun had fully claimed the day. I felt a profound stillness. Not the quiet of emptiness, but of a battle concluded, the dust settling on a new landscape. Days passed in a gentle rhythm of reflection. I took long walks, not to escape, but to simply be in a world where I no longer wore a disguise. I sat on park benches and listened to the uncomplicated wisdom of strangers, like the old woman with her bread for pigeons, whose words echoed with a truth no boardroom could ever teach. What matters is how you treat others. When Simone finally came to see me, 3 days later, she arrived not as my daughter-in-law, but as a pilgrim. Stripped of her parents' armor, the makeup, the labels, the defensive poise, she was simply a young woman, raw and real. She told me about her parents' poverty-forged souls, their trauma transmuted into a toxic gospel of wealth. I listened, understanding the root, but not excusing the poison it had borne. Her apology was not for them, but for her own long silence. It was the most sincere form of amends, the clear-eyed acknowledgement of a complicity she was now determined to end. I want to learn from you, she said, her eyes holding a hunger that had nothing to do with money. How to live with dignity. How to be rich without needing to prove it. I can't teach you that, Simone, I told her gently. That is a path you walk alone. But I can tell you the signposts. Question every motive, listen to the quiet voice you've been drowning out, and measure your life by peace, not appearances. We hugged, a real embrace, free of performance. When she left, she carried a new resolve, not a gift from me, but one she had found within herself. The weeks that followed were a quiet vindication. Marcus and Simone, united now by a shared truth rather than divided by hidden ones, began to build something authentic. The promotion in Singapore became not an escape, but a joint adventure, a canvas for their new life. They established firm, non-negotiable boundaries with Veronica and Franklin. The responses were predictable: threats, guilt, the rusty tools of financial control wielded with desperate impotence. My son and his wife held their ground. I remained in my apartment, my sanctuary of deliberate simplicity. The money in my accounts was the same, but it felt different now. It was not a secret, nor a weapon, nor a burden. It was merely a tool, one of many I possessed, and not the sharpest. One evening, as I stood on my balcony under Robert's familiar stars, I understood the final calculation. Veronica and Franklin's wealth was a fortress, built to keep the world, and their own past, out. It was heavy, cold, and required constant defense. My wealth was a garden. It had grown in silence, nurtured by effort and resilience. It provided shade, sustenance, and beauty, but it demanded no proclamation. Its value was in its roots, deep and unseen, and in the peace it offered to those who sat within it. The game was over. The performance was retired. What remained was this: the unshakable calm of a woman who knew exactly who she was, what she valued, and what she had built, not for an audience, but for herself. I was Ilara. Mother. Executive. Woman. Rich in every sense that truly, enduringly mattered. And that was not just enough. It was everything.